6 months ago, these were the best players in the world. But this season, 10 of them failed to qualify for their region's FNCS Major Finals. And in Europe, the most stacked region in the world, the finals were dominated by Sky and Scroll, a duo who has never placed in the top 5 in an FNCS Finals before. The more I looked into this major, the more kind of obvious it became. But why is it that so many of the world's best IGLs are just suddenly nowhere to be found? Well, there are 4 very interesting reasons for this. Top 3 teams from last year's Global Championship all had a very similar structure. You had one IGL who led the team, made the calls, and put the team into good positions, and then you had 2 fraggers whose entire job was to get damage, follow, and get eliminations in the endgame. Anyone who's analysed Queasy, Swizzy, and Murstach's Global Championship win would tell you that their game plan that they had and how it was executed was probably the biggest reason for their success. They got their surge early from their drop, hit the mid-game bunkers, which gave them insane loot, played Storm to keep them away from other teams in the mid-game and keep them with stacked materials, and then get into positions in the partial zones to claim height in the 8th zone, a strategy that led them to winning 3 matches in a row on day 1 and then the tournament overall. You could also say something similar about Vanya, Pixie, and Marius, who came second and were the most consistent team in 2025. In my opinion, a lot of their success was due to the IGLing and game plan from Vanya, as both teams' strategy was relatively similar. I think it's fair to say that a huge reason for the success of both of these teams was due to the game plan and planning of their IGLs. The entire reason that Queasy's team won over Vanya's team was due to a decision to counter-strat them as they rotated all the way over to the drop spot and hid near the launch pad that they knew Vanya's team used every single game, which is what makes it so crazy that both Queasy and Vanya failed to qualify to this season's major finals, along with a ton of other top IGLs. Now in trios, the team dynamics are relatively consistent. Your IGL was usually the tarper in the endgame who leads, and then the other 2 players just fragged. This means that a good tarper in trios will prioritize getting to a good safe layer and then just letting their 2 teammates get eliminations and materials to keep them going. 1 player can tarp, 2 can fight. But in duos, 1 player tarping means that half of your team is no longer shooting, and this means that you can't make pre-edit plays, you can't double spray, so it's way harder to get eliminations. Since you have 1 less player on the team, you also have 150 less builds total as a team, so you actually need to get more refreshes. Pablo and Gino came second, and by looking at their games, it's very clear how different the duos meta is from trios. Pablo leads, but Chino is always just following him, doing the exact same thing that he does. If Pablo fights someone, so will Chino. I mean, there was even a point in this endgame where they both instinctively held an ADS pump at the exact same angle at the exact same time. Pablo is leading, but Chino is not playing a separate role, he's just mirroring him. They rotate together, they fight together, they pressure the same players, and they even make the same mistakes like fumbling this overdrive grenade at the same time. A good duo looks like a solo player with double the output, opposed to trios where in most teams the IGL can be much more passive as the 2 fraggers work together. The proof of concept here is that Pablo was leading his duo, but in this game he still got 8 eliminations, all of which were in the endgame. This is why Queasy's tweet explaining why he struggled this season so much is so interesting. Every good team now is either a double fragger or double IGL, and I think having 1 person IGL and the other frag isn't the meta anymore, as you need 2 perfect players either in fighting or IGLing. Pablo and Chino are both a clear example of this. In trios, Ferdoxy was their IGL and they were both fragging, but they stuck together and had huge success, whereas their IGL Ferdoxy has unfortunately not qualified to the major finals. Another clear example of this would be Seti, Yapko, and Panzer, who placed 3rd at the Global Championships. Yapko and Panzer, both non-IGLs, ended up playing together in this major and then placing 10th, whereas Seti, their IGL in that trio, unfortunately did not qualify. You can start to see this trend emerge in 2024 when the main competitive game mode was still duos. The most successful team that year was Peterbot and Poyo, who dominated the year, placing 2nd, 1st in the regional majors, and then winning the Global Championship. Peterbot was the superstar, but Poyo was the perfect partner because he could follow, fight, pressure, and just keep up with whatever Peterbot was doing. One of the only IGLs who's actually still succeeding in duos is Acorn on N8, so I asked him why he thinks this is. He basically said he doesn't really know, but he's been trying to improve his fighting and mechanics for a while now, but it's still far behind where he wants it to be. He said he does agree that nowadays, especially with duos being back, you have to be good in every aspect and not just IGLing. Duos rewards 2 players who are just constantly working as a team, mirroring each other, and it doesn't really reward 1 player being a more passive IGL and having 1 person who's just a hardcore fragger. With that in mind, Sky and Scroll's insanely consistent performance to win them this first FNCS major makes a lot more sense. Very strangely, both Sky and Scroll contributed almost exactly the same to their duo. Look at how weirdly identical their tournament was. Sky had 30 eliminations, Scroll had 27. Sky dealt 8,036 damage, Scroll dealt 7,443. They were 1st and 2nd for time alive, separated by only 3 minutes, and even their accuracy was basically the same, with Sky at 7.76% and Scroll at 7.72%. Statistically, these 2 players look almost identical, where 1 player wasn't carrying in any aspect. But the stat that really proves this is assists. Assyrian counts an assist as when a player dies within 3 minutes of you shooting them. Scroll finished first with 56, and Sky finished second with 55. This really shows you that they weren't just getting a bunch of random solo kills in the end game. They were almost always just shooting the same player, pressuring the same layer, and turning every fight into a 2v1. The only stat where they clearly are separated is really builds placed, as Sky placed 4,688, third most in the tournament, and Scroll placed 2,846, which was 38th most, so way less. So yes, Sky is clearly leading more in terms of endgame, but he's not only tarping, given that he also finished first in eliminations. Sky is like the perfect modern IGL, as he's not like a passive tarper, he's a player who is aggressive and fights for the best positions in every endgame, and it's no surprise that Veno, who won on NA with Curve, also got the most eliminations when leading his team as well. Now, it wasn't only just the switch to duos which impacted a lot of top players. The fact that there was over 6 months between FNCSs also had a major impact. Bluntly, I asked for Doxy, for example, why he didn't qual to the Major 1 finals, and he said, "I've got no answer really, besides playing Valorant for 3 months and not touching the game. Won a Division Cup with Chino and then went into hiding." Now, obviously, this is W Cope, but there are definitely a lot of players who stopped grinding due to this break, and it's hurt their performance in this major. But whilst this was going on, Sky and Scroll, who won the major, were grinding harder than ever, playing noble scrims every single day. Now, in trios in 2025, they did have a bit of a rough year. They never really found a consistent third, switching from Refscar to iDrop to Thomas HD, and then they failed to qualify to the Global Championships. So Scroll told me that they were able to turn this relatively stinky year into an FNCS major win by grinding noble and void reviewing everything when everyone else wasn't. And then when other teams began to catch up, they had so much confidence because of this grind, and because they were helped by great mental coach, always Pappy. Scroll even changed off of his old awful binds where he used Scroll to switch between all 4 build pieces, and he individually also improved a lot. So he was improving a lot as an individual, but because of the grind, him and Sky were improving a lot as a team as well. Now, I did not ask him to say this, but when I was speaking to him, he also said that my map, the Training Hub version 2, has been a massive part of that success. So this is by far the easiest promotion I've ever done for my map. So if it's good enough for the FNCS winner, then it's good enough for you to search resub in-game to find it. And thank you, Scroll, for A, using it, and B, just giving me the freest promo. Now, obviously, this wasn't everybody's issue, and Quizzy himself even said that the narrative that he wasn't grinding was false. But what impacted a lot of the top players was the insane height meta this season. Height has always been the Fortnite win condition. You use fewer materials, you need to cover fewer angles, you control more space, and the entire lobby is just below you. This has been true all the way back to the World Cup in Chapter 1 and even before that, and it's a fundamental truth of competitive Fortnite endgames. Height wins games. No player represents us better than Queasy. Queasy alongside Veno won 6 of the 12 games in the Chapter 4 Season 2 FNCS Finals. Their strategy was just full sending height every single game that they could. The meta this season was based around kinetic blades, and they were basically the only team to have the purple rarity of this, whereas everyone else had blue. This had 3 uses, when the blue had 2, which meant that when everyone was flying into the sky to use these to rotate, they had 1 more use than everyone else. This 1 extra mobility charge meant that they could stay in the air longer, land last, and then easily claim height. So the meta this season worked really well for them to play height, and they were also just the best height team and had some really good chops when other players were out there. There's no surprise that they won half of the matches. In last year's FNCS Global Championship, both Queasy Swizzy Moustache and Vanya Pixie Marius's entire strategy revolved around playing height. Either Queasy's trio or Vanya's trio controlled height in 10 of the 12 matches. The only 2 games where neither team was on height were in both games where they weren't alive as a full trio, so they never even had the chance really to take it. In 6 games, one of those teams took height in the 8th zone and then held it all the way till the end, and 4 of these were converted into wins. Height has always been the way to win, but in Chapter 7's first major, this strategy was a complete disaster. Across these 12 games, there were 23 successful height retakes. Game 11 alone had 7 different height turnovers. There were only 2 matches where height was held by a single team for the entire endgame, and one of those was purely just because nobody was playing height for the entire moving zones, so Prax and Glubshy just looked up and realized it was free, so they just claimed it. The problem with height this season is that players could retake it from you very easily, whilst dealing insane damage to you. The main mobility item is the Overdrive grenades, and by combining it with the Flober grenade, players are just full sending height from the backside of Storm and just landing on top of your heads. What makes this so hard to counter is that players can now aim down sights whilst they're flying through the air, so players like Veno and Curve fly into the air with double SMG. It's just incredibly difficult to counter. This is very different from the Chapter 4 Season 2 meta where Queasy and Veno were playing on height, as if players were flying through the air with kinetic blades, they really couldn't deal damage to you. However, this season, they could kill you before you even notice. The only real warning that you could see other teams doing this is if you spotted the Flowery cloud. It was a telltale sign that players were going to do this, but teams have started doing this really deep into the backside of a Storm with a builds will often block the sightlines, so the teams on height often had no time to react to this. Historically, the most common way to retake height is by getting to the front side, spraying it out, and then chopping them down, and then building up from the front as they're falling. This happened 0 times across the 12 matches. Instead, all 23 height retakes utilized the Overdrive grenade strategy. This is 2 height retakes a match on average, where players are just psychoing up on top of height. 23 retakes was also just the successful ones I counted, as there were other players attempting to do this but failing, so I didn't count it. Chino and Pablo, who placed second, attempted a height retake in game 1, but were immediately pushed off by someone else Overdrive grenading them. Sky and Scroll, who won the event, only attempted a height retake once, and that was in game 11 when every other team was trying to do it at the same time. And I actually asked Scroll why he did this, since they didn't play height at all, and he just said, "Panic from my side, and I wanted to win the game in a nice way." They died instantly. Across the 12 matches, the top 2 teams in the leaderboard were on height for less than 30 seconds total, a complete contrast to the last global championships, where the top 2 teams controlled height for 10 of the 12 matches. Holding height for the entire of the moving zones, like Queasy and Vanya's team did in the global championships, just was not a viable strategy in this meta. Queasy specifically stating that he struggled this season due to this. With height being unplayable and my mid-ground IGLing being poo, I couldn't qual a cup. We already know height was a mess, and Sky and Scroll only spent 13 seconds on height across the entire tournament. So where a lot of players couldn't figure out the meta, Sky and Scroll played it absolutely perfectly. In the early moving zones, everyone is using Overdrive grenades, and if you land too low, players are just going to build over you and block your next rotate. So Sky and Scroll often overdrive onto very high layers in the early moving zones. Now this isn't because they want to hold height, but it's just because higher layers give them cleaner rotates in the next zones. Every single zone transition, Sky holds a wide edit ready to confirm it, while Scroll holds out the Overdrive grenade. But the angle at which they do this is what's really important. In this game, almost everyone was on the west side of this 9th zone, as the previous zone had pulled west to east. So importantly, Sky and Scroll are preparing to rotate towards the dead side with their Overdrive grenades. Then when the 9th zone pulls that way, they are the first team to move because they can instantly confirm and then Overdrive grenade. Because they landed first, they now have time. This means that they're already at the front side, they can look back, they can double spray, and they can just find themselves refreshes. And time is a huge part of their gameplay. When there's a complete mess happening up on height, these guys are just chilling at the front side, just double spraying back, picking up refreshes. Even if you look earlier in this game at the 7th zone, you'll notice they were trying to do the exact same thing, but when the zone doesn't pull towards the dead side, they do not do this rotate and instead plan something different. So by being the first teams to rotate towards the dead side, they can easily claim low ground, which means they can stay right at the front, which gives them tons of time to pick up eliminations and refreshes to keep themselves going. In a lobby with the best players in the world, their endgames look so easy because they always have so much time because they're always at the front side. But it wasn't just the endgame that changed from the global championships. The mid game did massively as well, as Epic removed one of the biggest safety nets top players had. Now, Storm Surge is supposed to force teams to fight, but in 2025, it did the complete opposite. Instead of taking risky fights, teams would intentionally trade damage back and forth with each other. Both teams got the Storm Surge they needed, neither team died, and suddenly they could just skip the most dangerous part of the game, which is the mid-game. By the end of the year, almost every single team was trading damage at the FNCS Global Championships, really outside of Fordoxy, Pablo, and Chino, the last known ethical Surge players. But once Epic changed Storm Surge to net damage, damage dealt minus damage taken, this strategy entirely fell apart. If you deal 300 damage and take 300 damage back, you're now just wasting heals. Teams who previously had a completely free pass through the mid-game by surge trading now have to actually play the game. This means that some of the more established teams that were predictably making every single endgame no longer had this free pass, and all of a sudden were struggling way more. But also this opens the door to any team with a solid mid-game strategy to succeed, rather than just the ones who were trading Storm Surge. But what's funny is that Sky and Scroll's winning strat was basically the same as Queasy, Murstache, and Swizzy strat from the Global Championships, just adapted to this meta. Now they land north of Battlewood Boulevard, loot quickly, and Sky bases on the hill north of their drop while Scroll finishes looting and collects a bunch of medkits for their Storm strat that they play later. From that hill, Sky has angles on teams fighting all the way around them. You might think that this position is just insane for damage because the whole area around them is pretty flat, but they didn't really actually deal that much damage. It's more that they just barely took any. Between zones 0 and 4, they only dealt 230 damage on average. Now that doesn't sound that crazy, but they only took 39 on average, meaning their average damage ratio from zones 0 to 4 was 5.9. Now, any net surge meta, that is incredibly valuable. But also, because this hill is somewhat near the center of the map, even if you get a max zone pool, it doesn't enter the storm until late into the 2nd zone. Now, this matters because Sky and Scroll want to play the storm into the 5th or the 6th zone, so if they take too much storm storm damage early, they risk getting storm sickness and having this strategy no longer work. So ironically, they were using a very similar idea to Queasy's global winning strategy, where they get clean surge, avoid the mid game, and then play storm into deadside. However, they've adapted it into a net surge meta where they're just trying to get around 200 damage and then take 0. Now you can see how well practiced this entire early game strategy was based off what happened in game 11 when Pablo and Chino tried to contest them. Sky had a pixel perfect drop to slide off of the rock to grab the weapon, and if he had missed it, Scroll also had the perfect drop to slide off of the tree, which also would have gotten the gun before Pablo and Chino. So when you put all of this together, the pattern becomes kind of obvious. The change to duos punished players who were specialists in IGLs rather than all-round good players. A ton of the top players got lazy and didn't grind. The current meta punishes teams who are extremely height dominant, and the change to net surge allowed basically any team to have a successful mid game. Obviously, it doesn't mean that these IGLs are completely washed and we'll never see them again by any means, but this explains how we've seen so many new up-and-coming players be successful over the last 6 months. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. I'm trying to get to 1 million subscribers this year, and I would love your help. Peace.